Words which describe the impressive credentials of these panelists, so I'm not going to introduce them since you've seen their bios, but I'm going to start, I think, by asking a question of Sister Danielle, who directed this and who played Shylock and who therefore is responsible for a substantial part of this miasma of hatefulness. Let me ask you, Sister Danielle, why do this play? Is it a good idea to do this play or a bad idea? Use a number 2 pencil, take your time.
Well, I have to say I think it's a good idea, but I would say there is evolution to that point. Why we did this play was in part due to this panel series, and also we wanted the panel series to take on more heft in the sense of really being willing, I'd say our company being willing to dig in our into plays that are challenging, are uncomfortable, are unpleasant, and therefore the actors being willing to go to those places. I happen to be a big believer in the Greek idea of catharsis, and so in inhabiting those roles, there is the chance to reflect back on yourself. And as most artists are looking for truth, if that's really what you're seeking, then the reflection is a wonderful way to learn both about yourself, about your character, and about the world. So that's really the main reason why we chose this play.
Rabbi Hirschfield, as one infidel to another, are you happy to have this play seen, or is it a play which you are unhappy to have seen?
So I want to start with a confession, which seems appropriate with Father Malone on the panel. There is almost nothing about this play I don't love. Every time I see it, I feel that. I felt it, and I told Sister Danielle, so she knows it's not just me being nice in public, how deeply I felt it tonight, having never seen it staged this way. And so I'm very happy it's being seen. The fact that I'm happy it's being seen doesn't mean every moment in it makes me happy. And I think that's actually one of the most powerful things about the play. If we're only going to be happy about what makes us happy, we're going to have a very small and dangerous world. It seems to me what this play does is it invites us to confront things in ourselves that we all need to address at one time or another, and that's a gift. Right? If you asked me that question 100 years ago in a different country, I'd probably have a different response. So the answer about how any piece of art, it seems to me, or anything is being used in the world has to do with what's the context. Tell me when. Tell me by whom. But the idea that absolutely it's out of bounds, I can't imagine at this moment in time living without this play.
David, let me ask you, it's frequently said that, one of the virtues of the play is that it's a mirror on hatefulness and encouragement to reflect and all the rest of it. Is that anything remotely like what Shakespeare thought the message of this was?
There's so much about this play I don't love. Yeah, I think it is a mirror of hatefulness, but I think one of the things that happens with Shakespeare, and I think Brad's point about context in this case is probably everything, is that Shakespeare has become, sort of from the middle of the 18th century on, the kind of guarantor of our best selves. And that's a big burden, and not one he asked for, and not one that makes any real sense apart from the whole series of accidents of history. It's a hateful play in lots of ways, and we don't want to see that. We have talkbacks like this. I could make a living doing talkbacks after productions of Merchant of Venice, because everyone's so nervous about it, and they want to be assured that it's not anti-Semitic. I think it is.
Yeah, it is.
That's, I think, but again, in the context of what does that mean? I think it is anti-Semitic. I think it's a play that's very much about the impossibilities in Shakespeare's own age of kind of utopian solutions to the problems of difference. And see, the trouble with English professors is we get up and talk for 60 minutes. So I've got to not do that.
Not tonight, buddy.
Yeah. But the one thing I want to say, it struck me tonight, one of the lovely things about this kind of engagement with Shakespeare is you just listen so hard and so well. And actors can, one of the geniuses of actors is they can act past language. But here they don't have that option. And what among the many words that popped out at me was difference. The difference of our spirit, the difference of old Shylock and Bassanio, the difference of blood. And it turns out that difference is much less accommodatable than we hope, and that Shakespeare believes, would be my sense.
John, as an actor who has been in a fair amount of Shakespeare, what was your take on this method of presentation, of the reading of it as opposed to the acting?
I had never seen a presentation quite like this. What did you call it?
It's called In the Style of Reader's Theater.
In Style of Reader's Theater. I've seen readings of plays, stage readings of plays, where there was interaction between the readers with one another as well as the audience. So this was the first that I'd seen just strictly with the audience, and I got a lot out of it. I heard things that I hadn't heard before within the context of the language. And so I found the presentation really wonderful because it opened up new vistas for me. And one of the things that it kind of opened up for me is I had to reevaluate whether I think this is a play solely about anti-Semitism. I'd probably be fairly controversial in this esteemed group of individuals, but I will say I think I'm the only, well, no, there's two actors here. Okay, I'm one of the two. But I think that the play deals to me more with otherness and using religion as the prism of that otherness in the same way that he uses color in Othello or race as the prism to go into that otherness and how people respond to the other. And the same thing happens in The Tempest as it does in Othello, as it does in this play. So there's these collection of plays that Shakespeare's kind of worked on that are about the other. So that's what I got out of this even more. I said, okay, I could see how you could look at it from the way it was presented today, really makes you focus so particularly on the language itself that you can see the anti-Semitism. Now, in the context of a production and a director and acting the whole thing out with a set, with costumes, with the ideas that the director is going to bring to the fore, and a group of actors really putting it on stage. Not to say that this wasn't, but I'm saying in a different way. Something else comes to my mind, and it becomes less a play about anti-Semitism and more a play about otherness. And I tend to think that Shakespeare was a little bit more of a humanist and was much more engaged with the humanity of his characters and protagonists than their race or their religion. And that's just me.
So, Father Matt, John mentioned the other. Is this a play, the teaching and the reading and the presentation of which promotes gentleness toward the other or sets it back?
Well, I think, St. Thomas Aquinas said what is received according to the mode of the receiver, right? And so it depends on what you bring to the play in large measure. But I do think that the play is on some level about otherness, but it's also fundamentally about sameness, because I think the root of human conflict is when I think we tend to imitate the desires of one another. And my thinking here is informed by the thought of René Girard. And when our desires converge on the same thing, in this instance, belonging, we have conflict, and we resolve that conflict by scapegoating, by the community picking another and expelling them. And that's how we restore order until the process starts all over again, right? And that's what I see here. Because one of the things that's really interesting to me is that Shylock becomes the most threatening to the other players when he really starts to act like them.
I look at this play and you can see the hatred that comes at Shylock. You could also see the hatred that Shylock has for the Christians, so that goes back and forth. But Shylock, to me, in this play is a sympathetic character, the protagonist, and also a very sympathetic character because somehow in Shakespeare's brilliance, he allowed us to see Shylock's humanity. Sometimes at the expense of the Christians. I don't see their humanity as much as I witness Shylock's. And that gives me, as an audience member, some love for this character. And when the character says that wonderful speech, hath not a Jew eyes, I mean, I don't think Shakespeare would put that in the hands of a character that he didn't like, that he was looking to have people deride or denigrate. He's really trying to say something about humanity and maybe even on some level of equality and make us look, those that are Christians, look at our own behavior and understand us better. So I think that all comes through. This is also, again, radical. I think Shakespeare, as he does with most of his protagonists, in some way loves them. And as an actor, that's the first place I start.
So, Father Matt and Rabbi Hirschfeld, you deal with hate and love for a living, so to speak. Father Matt, you first. What actually, not aspirationally, not ideally, but what actually is the more impactful emotion? Is it love or is it hate? Door number one or door number two?
Love.
Yeah, we just
Are
have
we all agreed on this? Can we? No.
What do you know?
The actors.
Yeah, that's the actor's thing. Okay.
well, I would say,
They earn their livelihood on this thing.
as a person of faith, I believe that all that is was created in love. So it's impossible for me to say that hate is stronger. I think that hate is easier. It's easier to destroy than it is to create, and it's simpler, and so, getting back to what I was saying earlier, it's an easier behavior to emulate, to imitate, and so forth. What I was saying earlier that I think that the moment when Shylock really becomes threatening is when he becomes like the other characters in the play. What I mean is that I think there's a way in which the anti-Semitism that he calls out and says in his soliloquy is a revenge, right? I mean, anti-Semitism, certainly among Christians, is a form of revenge that's totally unjustified. And he is responding to that. So in a sense, the behavior that he's seeking to emulate is prior to the opening of the curtain. And then he then fails in that revenge. And then what do the Christians do? They take revenge out on him and force this conversion, right? And the whole cycle begins again. And I said it at another time, and I really felt it again tonight, that I think it's hard to have. I have compassion for all of these characters. It's tough for me to have sympathy for them, but I do have compassion for them, and I tend to have more for Shylock because he is marginally better than the other people on the stage, but also in part because I think that the act of violence that is done to him is actually even more grotesque than a physical act of violence, however awful that is, right? The most violent moment in this play is not when he almost kills Antonio, but when they force his conversion, when they force him to violate his conscience. They enter into the most sacred part of who he is and destroy it.
Yeah, there was something about watching you, which I've now done several times, in that scene, at the trial scene at the end, as things go awry, let us say. It's excruciating. The humiliation is excruciating. All right, so now it's your turn on the love-hate question.
So I think you phrased it in a way that's really interesting and I want to press on. You asked which is more impactful, not which is better or
Right.
more durable.
Right.
And I think for us, as comforting as it is to say love is more impactful, there's a world full of victims of hatred who will tell you that hate is pretty damn impactful. And ignoring that we do at their peril and at ours. So, for me, they are both powerful drivers of reality in the world, and it's up to us which we choose. What I would say is that typically, hate consumes and love creates. I don't know that it's actually easier to destroy and to hate than it is to love and to hate and destroy than it is to create and to love. I'm really not sure. I think for some people it's true. I think for other people it's not. But for me, the significance of the emotion doesn't lie in its ease or its naturalness. You know, the same way we have evidence-based medicine is a big topic of conversation now. So I'm very interested in evidence-based approaches to life. Show me the evidence of a hate-based approach to life. What kind of world does it create for the hater and the hated, and for the legacies of both? Show me the evidence of the world created by the lover and the loved, and the legacy it creates for them. And then you make a choice. I think there are times that actually loving is far more difficult, no matter how much we tell ourselves otherwise. And there are times that loving is a whole lot easier, no matter what we tell ourselves. Show me the context, show me the relationship, delve into that moment, and we'll know. But to circle back to the initial question, and I think probably the most discomforting, is that hate can be every bit as impactful as love, and sometimes much more if you're the one who's hated.
I mean, David, you're a sentimental person. You're a Red Sox fan, which means by definition...
Just means I know more about tragedy than comedy.
I got it beat. I'm a Cubs fan.
You do.
We have that beat.
We'll see how much gentleness for the other there is now that I've said that. Isn't it sentimental to say that love is, in fact, the more impactful emotion?
Well, I like the way Brad thought about it. I mean, I do think this idea of what would a world be like with lovers and loved, and what would a world be like with haters and hated. I'm voting for loved, and sentimental it may be, but it seems obvious to me.
I'm talking about actual impact.
But, I think that's actual impact. I mean, I do think that's impact. And I think it's one of the things that's really smart about this play is that Act 5, Shylock's gone in Act 4, never shows up again in Act 5, never mentioned by name. There's one reference to the Jew, and that's only the money that Jessica brings with her to Lorenzo's new formed family. So the comedy works by exclusion, completely by exclusion. And that interests me. And I think around hatred, there's a phrase that shows up pretty often through medieval theologians, and they're interested in who can be saved, as everyone must be. And the phrase they often use is charitable hatred. I'm fascinated by this idea of charitable hatred. And the place where people really argue about charitable hatred, Augustine does, but any number of church fathers, it's around the issue of conversion, about forced conversion. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, I hate you, but it's a charity to force you to convert, because that's the only way your soul can be saved. And Matt called attention to some of the ironies of this. Of course, so what would it mean to force somebody to convert? Right? If you assume this is a matter of faith, of spirit, all you can do is force someone to perform outward actions of religious practice. You can't force anybody to do anything but belief or faith. Right? So it's a kind of bizarre notion. And in terms of the binaries the play plays with, letter versus spirit, mercy versus justice, all these terms where the Christians win. Well, this is an argument for letter. All you can do is, it's not about spirit. I can force you to convert, maybe. And by the way, in Elizabethan England, they kind of knew better. When the Elizabethan settlement plays out, Elizabeth says, Francis Bacon probably wrote the words, we do not make windows into men's souls. Now, go to church, behave like a good member of the Church of England, and that's fine. Believe whatever you want. We do not make windows into men's souls. But that the play at the end, this forced conversion, remember early in the play, and again, this is what was so lovely about the way this worked out, you could hear things. Early in the play, when Shylock finally says he'll give him the money, the line is, the Hebrew will turn Christian. Well, at the end of the play, that's exactly what's enforced. The Hebrew will turn Christian. You know, it's suddenly that line, which is ironic and relatively innocent in Act 1, becomes brutal in Act 4. The Hebrew will turn Christian. It's going to be enforced, but it is an act of pure hatred. The hatred we know, the charity I'm not so sure about if the only thing it can accomplish is this enacting of certain activities. And I thought Danielle was great. I mean, he just defeated, beaten at that moment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's easy for us to judge it as an act of pure hate. And from our perspective, I'm willing to assume that for everyone in this room, it's seen somewhere in the domain of hateful. But I think it's really important to imagine there are times and places, and there are times and places in this world today in which what we deem to be a hateful act of coercion is actually seen as a loving act of redemption. And if we cannot begin to imagine that space, I'm not saying agree with it or support it, we may have to actually actively fight against it. But if we cannot bring its reality into our thinking, we have no shot of actually dealing with it. It seems to me it's precisely at the moment that that act which we think of as hateful and can see in the other person doing it some kind of, albeit we would judge, twisted expression of love, that's when we can begin to address it and go, what are you actually doing here? Because the debate about whether or not acts of conscience or faith can be compelled is a live dispute in classical Jewish tradition, in classical Christian tradition, and in classical Muslim tradition. So it's a live question. I think that for us in the 21st century, like, you can't compel people's thoughts. That's a very new idea.
So this leads, regrettably, to the obvious question, which is the role of religiosity and or religious affiliation in promoting charity toward the other. And we've had in the last couple of weeks beheadings, immolations, mass murders. You've had the president point out, no one has disputed its historical accuracy, that this is not exactly the first time in history that has occurred. Does religious affiliation, does religion advance the cause of gentleness toward the other, or does it actually impede it? Father Matt.
Well,
You've got 5 seconds.
Matt, let John take that one.
I wasn't going to touch it. I wasn't going to touch it. I was hoping that Bob would go like
You
I'll
moved
touch it
back
after.
more or less back there when I
I'll
asked that.
touch it after, but
I think that
You're
the
next, Danielle.
I know. I got that.
I think first, I think religion is a very difficult word to understand, right? Because it seems to include so many different traditions and so many different people who live those traditions in such variant ways that where we're talking about religion, I'm not always sure what we're talking about, right? What I do feel comfortable saying is that I don't think that there is anything innately that is innate to religion that makes it more or less violent than anything else human, right? And when people say, you know, all of these wars that have been fought over religion, well, wars have been fought over a lot of things, right? And I don't think that there is anything in religion per se, certainly not within the great monotheistic faiths, that with which I'm most familiar, that is innately violent, that necessarily leads to violence. Religious people aren't violent; they are. And you know, and I take the point that was said earlier. There is a way. I think ultimately faith is a matter of the heart and of one's own internal disposition. That's certainly true for me. I mean, I'm struggling every day to convert to Christianity, right? But there is and I think that fundamentally in the end, whether, similar to something that the rabbi was saying earlier, whether religion is violent ultimately depends on the religious person and how they understand their own faith, and how it informs their lives. So it's very difficult, I think, to have a categorical answer to the question.
All right, well, we're going to go through this with a couple of people, but you guys should, if you have questions, when you have questions, be prepared to ask them. We have somebody, I think, with a microphone in a few minutes who's going to circulate it. But Sister Danielle.
I would agree with what Father Matt was saying. It depends on the person, I think, because you can be extreme about anything. But circling also back to hate and love, I think love takes a lot more effort on the individual. And it's, I think, to really love someone, and to love someone that you don't naturally like or gravitate toward takes that much more effort. So I do think, so I think that about love. I also think about religion. I tend to be more comfortable with faith, because sometimes when you start talking about religious institutions, though they are necessary and they have been important to the world, it feels very depersonalized, where I think it really matters what's in the person's heart, and as an individual can have an impact in a home, in a town, in a country, if in their heart they wish to love someone or to affect change through love.
Brad, and then we'll open it up.
I actually can be a little bit more categorical for myself. I think that religion is absolutely capable of and has been responsible for nurturing and driving some of the most horrific things human beings have done to each other for thousands of years. Wait, you might not like the second half of that statement. Here's the thing. Your willingness to applaud for that only works if you'll now applaud for the second half. Those same traditions for those same thousands of years have been capable of nurturing and driving the most unimaginable acts of love and kindness and self-transcendence than anything else we know. And typically the faithful only want to know the second story, and the unfaithful only want to know the first, because actually we're not interested in having our souls stirred at all. We're interested in having ancient traditions that say whatever we believe and burn down the world. It's up to us.
I would just like to add that I agree with every word you just said. So, my only point was to say that I didn't think that there was something intrinsic in religion that made it necessarily more violent than anything else human. Mm-hmm. That was my only point.
All right, we have some time for some questions. There's a microphone, and you probably want to. Since this is being live streamed, you need a microphone.
Oh, okay. Okay. This has been a very enjoyable discussion to listen to, because you haven't spent a great deal of time discussing what, in a less interesting context, people discuss, which is this an anti-Semitic play or not? You've gotten way beyond that. So I want to, if you can indulge me, I'll give you the reason why I never thought it was an anti-Semitic play, but then turn it on Mr. Kasten, who's a professor from the school that I was lucky enough to go to, and see why you said that. Because to me, it's obvious the play is full of hateful
briefly, though, relatively.
Yeah, but it's full of anti-Semitic people. And as it was mentioned, the revenge of Antonio is at least as bad, probably worse. And then, as you've just said, religion itself is not represented by these people. These are people who act in the name of religion, who are not necessarily good representatives of that. So to me, it's not a play that's advancing an anti-Semitic agenda. So I'm curious why you made that statement, because it doesn't seem to be representative of the nuanced views you've expressed since then.
All right, you're being turned on.
I'm being Christianity as a superior form of religion. I think the quick discussion I made before of the way Christianity sort of definitionally is supersessional in the way it thinks about Judaism. It's not, and I do think it's important to see there were no Jews Shakespeare thought he was offending. What's nuanced and interesting about Shylock, I think, is not the "hath not a Jew eyes" speech, because that ends in the mutual commitment to revenge. The moment that I feel Shylock's humanity, which I do feel, is the discussion of Leah's ring. I think that's the moving moment, except even that scene, and you were very wonderful in it, Danielle, I think, is the way he's manipulated by Tubal back and forth between expressing the hatred and then Tubal generating that passion. But with Leah's ring, he would have given a wilderness of monkeys for, there you feel something powerful, human, real. But I think there's an awful lot of sentimentality over the last 200 years or so of producing Merchant of Venice. I think it probably starts in the middle of the 19th century, where it really becomes powerful and unavoidable. But so my point is partly polemical. I think it's too easy to let Shakespeare play that role as the guarantor of our best instincts, of the complications of culture. I think the culture of Venice, which is within the play, excludes. Jessica can be accommodated in the comedy of the end of Act 5 because she's female. Therefore, the mark of circumcision, the real mark of difference, isn't physical. It's not noticeable at any point at all. She's young, she's pretty, she's rich. She's abjured Daddy's faith, and she's taken Daddy's ducats, and she's willing to do that, and she says that early, that she can't wait to leave her father's house. That world of Venice doesn't accommodate the Jew, which is what the speech heading is in the early plays. And it seems to me that this is, finally, it's either a critique of comedy, which it may very well be. I mean, Shakespeare does keep pushing against the genres he works in. But it seems to me there's a way in which it's hard to see what sense it's not anti-Semitic. That's the way the play works. That I don't think it should not be performed. I think it's fascinating in all the ways. I agree with virtually everything anyone's said here, but I don't know what the alternative is to anti-Semitism in the play.
All right, so let me ask people, were you able to detect a kernel or two of anti-Semitism in this play, or was it Brad?
Yeah. I mean, I think one way maybe to solve this is, sure, there's plenty of anti-Semitism in the play, but there's also plenty of anti-other things in the play. And I don't think he's saying no to that. Absolutely. So I think that may be part of the... So often the debates about the anti-Semitism of the play, you see, he hates Jews, and everyone else looks great. And I'm like, what play are you watching? Right? But the fact that other people look lousy doesn't necessarily mean we can't single out specific subgroups of humanity who look especially lousy. Right? And so I don't think it's an either or. I think the play can simultaneously be really anti-Semitic in some ways, deeply anti-Catholic in other ways, really angry at Europe of a certain moment in yet other ways, and maybe forecasting some really dark stuff about the human condition in general. I don't think it's, here you don't have to choose any one of them for all of them to be true.
You can throw in racism, too.
Yeah.
Right, that's what's right.
Morocco,
All right, Daniel,
my complexion.
Exactly.
You've grappled with this a whole hell of a lot.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I really think the Christians look lousy in this play. And I was really happy, the more that we dug into it, that he does present both. It is an anti-Semitic play, but I don't think the Christians fare very well in this play. But there is also the thing about the Moor, let all of his complexions choose me so. And there's a few other ones, or just even as they go through the suitors, nobody escapes ridicule or denigration.
Now,
So,
John, what do you think?
I still say it's pretty much how the production is done. I've played Shylock before. I've played the
Moor.
Prince of Morocco. It's Morocco, right?
You're right,
Yeah. And the way in which we did it, the way in which we styled it in our production, because the Prince of Morocco, of all the princes, is the only prince who has, outside of Bassanio, that are suitors, 2 scenes. a beginning and an end. So there was some level of interest that he was able to come back for a second opportunity to be with Portia. And though Portia turns him down because he chooses the wrong casket, in the production that I did, it was obvious that she was really disappointed that he did, because she would have liked if he had chosen the right one. So that obliterated the racism.
This is going to take a second, but I am going somewhere with this. Shylock was a human being, and like all of Shakespeare's characters, flawed, and very flawed. And I think it's absurd to call this an anti-Semitic play. He's a human being with human flaws. Those flaws get him into trouble, and I think Shakespeare treats him very sympathetically. Those flaws are massive. He has many more flaws than, let's say, an Othello. I mean, he has many more things thrown at him than, say, Othello. His daughter runs off.
I don't disagree with that one little bit.
But what I'm seeing in this play is I'm seeing a flaw which we see in our society today, and that's at any time anyone says anything, any word with the letter J starting it, the word anti-Semitism comes up. So if a Palestinian is a human being, you're anti-Semitic. If you object to anything Israel does, you're anti-Semitic. And I would say that's a tragic flaw, and I think you're being...
Okay, so we've
You was directed. I'm going.
You were turned on.
I'm going to answer
Okay.
that. First of all, if you knew me, you would know how wrong that is. I'm a Jew, but a secular Jew, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel. So that's entirely wrong. That's probably another conversation. You misunderstood what I said. I'm not. Shakespeare certainly treats Shylock in complicated ways. I said I feel the humanity around the Leia. I think the play, it's about, what I'm talking about is not really about Shylock at all. It's about the way Judaism is constructed in the play in its relationship to Christianity. And it's about the structure of the play and what happens in Act 5, the exclusions of Shylock, why he can't be accommodated in the romantic comedy that's the structure of the play. I don't disagree with your account of Shylock. I completely disagree with either way you describe what I'm saying and what I think. That's not even close to the...
So I'm going to call an audible, and we're going to, since we've covered the issue of whether it's anti-Semitic or not, we're going to go to one more question. But first, Rabbi, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think, first of all, there's no such thing as being a human being in general. That's a fallacy. The particulars of who we are, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, Jew, Christian, atheist, American, Danish, that's who we are. So there's no getting off the hook by saying it's a general human frailty. I don't know what that means. None of us can know what that means. We all live in our lives, and those lives shape our opinions. So no one gets off the hook by saying, oh, it's just in general. The other thing that I will say, my experience tells me that both the hypersensitivity to anti-Semitism and the hyper-insistence on its absence should give pause to the people who hold either opinion.
Okay, so one more question which does not ask whether or not this is really anti-Semitic.
There, she's got the mic there. Do you see her, Jen?
Over there. Okay, and you have the mic, which gives you a big advantage. In
So
that case, you're chosen.
Yeah.
You have the right.
You know, the thing is just, I've seen this play many, many times, in Europe, here, many, many times. And very many times, I have this reaction, which I want to share with you. First of all, the genius of Shakespeare is that we think this play was written today. Like the fervor of religions, which has come back today in 21st century, is shameful. It's abominable, okay? So I feel the playwright, Shakespeare, did not sit down to hate this character, this character, this character. He was so brilliant, understatement of the moment, that he loved all his characters. And actually he left it to us to make up our own meanings. For me in this play, Portia, which represents Christianity, is worse than Shylock because she tricks him. She is like cunning and clever, and she's saying, oh yeah, we want to give you 10,000 times more, 10 times more money, and you so greedy you don't want it? We're going to trick you. You cannot take 1 pound of flesh exactly.
Okay, so you're asking for people's comments on that point. We're going to start with the left.
I'll just say this. I think that perhaps the real genius of the play is that it reminds us that it is better to discuss something without resolving it than to resolve something without discussing it.
Nice. Wow.
John, top that.
I don't know what to say. I second that, and I would say this play, along with several others, is Shakespeare's great treatise on otherness, and it really depends on what you see and how you feel about it, but it's really about otherness through the prism of religion.
Sister Danielle, for whom we owe so much by way of thanks for tonight.
I would just say it's so important to keep reading them and keep looking at them from every angle that's conceivable, because he has opened the can of worms on human nature and humankind. And the more that we can look at that, his work, and then where that leads us beyond that, the better off we'll be.
Brad.
Yeah, I love that you said the genius of the play for you is. I don't know what the genius of the play is, but I know if we're willing to ask ourselves what seeing it, hearing it, participating in this conversation does for us to leave us a little better off as we leave, that for me is what works. What the genius is, what it really meant, I got no idea. Again, I'm back to it's a very evidence-based thing with enough humility to always end with what it is for me, for each of us.
David, is the play anti-Semitic or not?
Auden said in great line, he says, "Great books read us." And this is a great book,
Yeah.
a great play.
Nice.
Thank you, everybody.